Hey guys, welcome to 40 Years and 40 Beers. We have a very special guest this evening. This gentleman has over 25 credits to his name. He's been part of independent films, bigger franchises, and everything in between. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in welcoming Chris Roberts to the show. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for having me.
Hey,
Yes.
welcome, Chris. Thanks for
Bob.
coming aboard, bud.
Thanks, Bob. Good to be here.
We like to start off with having our guests just tell us a little bit about themselves. So where are you from? Where did you grow up? Kind of how did you get into your current career path, and just a little bit about your background?
All right. Well, I grew up, Joe, between Northwest Pennsylvania here, Venango County, and Southwest Florida. So I basically had the privilege of both worlds, I guess. A small rural town in Northwest Pennsylvania. I lived there off and on. My parents were divorced when I was 3, so my mother went to Florida. So I would spend summers in Florida, come back to PA and go to school. Lived that way up until about 13. And then we moved to Florida full time. My elder brother and I got a brother 4 years older than me. You know, we grew up together all our lives. I believe I was 8 and he was 12. We went separate ways, you see. So now being in Southwest Florida, which was a far cry different than rural Pennsylvania, I was without my brother. So I didn't have that sense of protection, you know, what have you. But it was tough. You know, it was tough coming up.
And you were 8 when that happened.
When my brother and I, because he was 12 or 13 and he went to live with other family members. And, you know, that was our MO, Joe. We, you know, our family, everybody's family has a little this or that, but, you know, we were bad kids supposedly. And we ended up finding ourselves amongst different family members growing up, different geographical locations. And looking back, you know, I honestly think that's not good for a kid.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
To support the teen years of my story, I think it's valid. I make that point. So here I am in my early teens in Southwest Florida. And mind you, I was a rural country kid. I wasn't used to diversity. You know, I wasn't used to, there was a lot of things. It was a huge culture shock. You know, everything was different. And when you mix with that, my brother went his separate way a few years prior. So now here I am all alone. Saying that to preface, in my early teens, I managed to find myself in a street gang. And when I told family I joined a street gang, the next thing was at 16 years old, packing my things and moving in with said street gang.
Now, what part of Southwest Florida, Chris?
I was in Lee County, Bob, Fort Myers.
Okay.
So I was in all kinds of different schools. You know, school wasn't very important once I went to Florida, because once I got to Florida, the difference between Florida and rural Pennsylvania, my hometown, is obviously I'm not from Florida. Again, like I said, small town, country kid. I was the bullying, you know. So to be honest, when I moved out of my parents' house and moved in with the gang, street credibility became more important than anything else.
Yeah.
Sure. They became your family.
Yeah. It's really hard. Well, in fact, it was kind of easy to associate them as my family, because you don't just join the gang. You go through, I had a 3-minute head to toe violation is what they call it.
I never thought they were real. That's a real way to induct someone.
Yes, sir.
That's amazing. Okay.
Well, and mind you, I had moved in with the gang and I wasn't an active member yet.
Right. Okay.
And they were highly organized. Once a week, they'd have meetings. And guess what? Even though I lived there, I had to leave.
Okay.
So here we are again, that young age with no stability, man. None whatsoever. And I wasn't going to school. I wasn't listening to responsible adults. You know, I was full blown wilding out. And it was a path that led me to some very difficult places in my life. Like I said, I dropped out of school in the 9th grade. By this time, you know, I'm doing what gang members do. I'm out, you know, hanging out, drinking 40s, playing spades, smoking weed, you know, all that nonsense.
Yeah.
Not going to school, no job. And you know, that it was like a cancer. It allowed me to be antisocial. It was basically my first acting gig, if that makes sense, because
Yeah, absolutely does.
some people are born into the gang. I was born into somewhat of a wholesome life. You understand? Even though my family had its issues, my family loved me. My family took care of me. I didn't elaborate, but when I was 3 years old, I was hit by a car. All right.
Okay.
It was near fatal. When I believe when I went into kindergarten, I had an eye patch, I had false teeth. So I was constantly the object of ridicule. Everybody liked to push me around. Knowing how that felt when I was also known, like I have friends from like grade school, middle school. They always knew me to stand up to the bully. I don't know, at that young age, kids are cruel. Kids are certainly cruel.
Yeah.
You know?
Sure.
Yeah.
So again,
And for you to be literally standing up to it your entire life since 3, right? I mean, it wears on you.
like I said, when I moved in, I wasn't even a member yet. Basically what happened was, well, I might as well have been, minus the getting my violation, minus getting jumped in. I did everything with them. They called me the crazy ass white boy, you know, and that's simply because I had to do whatever it took to be accepted.
Yeah.
Because again, having lost that fellowship with my brother, but going back to where I was with that violation, when they kicked my ass for 3 minutes, I mean, there was 20 fellas in the room, and they let one go to work on me, and he was a bad dude, big stocky fella, and he just started going to work on me. And after that 3 minutes, I was barely still standing, you know. That's when they all circled me up and hugged me and said, "Welcome to the nation, brother. We love you." I associated that with what I was used to. Does that make sense? I was used to that.
What you lost with your actual brother. Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
now, what gang was this, Kris?
it was the Almighty Latin King.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of Latin King chapters in the Philadelphia area.
Yeah, this chapter was from Chicago. What had happened is there was a couple members, not necessarily Crowns or Incas or anything like that, just a couple of guys they had sent down with permission to scout the area to bring the gang down there. I was in that. I got clippings from when the feds busted these guys. I was right in the middle with them. I was right there.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, I guess looking back, maybe you don't have such fond memories, or you realize that there were certain obvious mistakes and stuff like that. But losing your brother, and you were getting into an organization from the ground up. Right. So like at such a young age, you have a completely different perspective on that situation, I would imagine, than you do right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Back then, it was what I needed, I thought.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I needed that.
Yeah.
And when I talk about it was familiar to me after getting my ass kicked, that chaotic love was familiar to me because that's what I knew. Like I said, every family has its issues. Mine had some too. But that chaotic love kind of felt like home. But at the same time, it was scary, man. You know, it was scary.
Yeah.
But I knew, you know, there was a group of guys that bullied me significantly more than any others. So they were the ones that I had to deal with. And they would walk past my house after school every day. So I went inside and I got my stepdad's pistol and I put it in my waistband. And when these guys came by my house, I called them all. There was like 8 of them. And I called them out and I confronted every one of them. And I was like, "Why are you guys picking on me? Why are you pushing me around?" I'd had enough at this point, Joe.
Yeah.
But just saying that to set the example that I had set the example. You understand? I had now drew the line. And there, in my young mind at that point, I couldn't backpedal from that. If that makes sense. So now I'm part of an infant chapter of a Chicago gang. They're violent, and these guys aren't.
Yeah.
You know.
And I would imagine anybody trying to plant a flag in a new territory would have to be a little extra hard, a little extra bravado, a little extra violence, you know, because they're kind of the new kids on the block, so to speak, as well.
And add to that, I'm Caucasian.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's
impressionable and a teenager and
that's a hell of a wrinkle.
And trying to find a way to earn money. Yeah, I get that.
Just to give you one idea, I'll share one story, maybe a couple, but these are some of those stories that took me to that point where I really began to say, what the hell am I doing? So I jumped in a Cadillac with two Cuban guys these guys were all 10, 15 years older than me. Okay. As a teenager, they're in their late 20s, some early 30s. So I'm in this Cadillac with two of these guys, and we're going into a rival neighborhood, and they're getting ready to kick a door in and run in this house and do their bidding, whatever it may be. I don't ask questions at this point. So I'm sitting in the back of this Cadillac with a 44 Magnum in my lap. I think I'm 16, maybe 17 at this point. And they're all laughing, and we had just done a bunch of coke. That was a problem too. Drugs became an issue. And the one looked over his shoulder and looked in the back seat, and he told me, he says, "We're getting ready to kick this back door in. You shoot anybody that comes out the front door." I don't think I've ever been more scared in my life. I don't guess it was fear. It was probably adrenaline.
Adrenaline, absolutely. My heart would have been pounding.
Now, you gave us the story about your dad's gun earlier, but this would have been the first time you actually pulled the trigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that adds to it too.
Well,
yeah.
You know what, Joe? I thank God to this day, nobody came out that front door. And when them guys came and when they came and got back in that car, I didn't ask a damn word about what happened behind it.
You're just happy to get out of there.
God forbid, somebody does come out of that house and you don't pull the trigger. There's going to be consequences.
Yeah. Oh, there became a time where there were consequences. I mentioned what happened was, however, the hierarchy made the decision in Chicago. They sent like 7 or 8 guys from Chicago. Now, this is after I had been hanging out with 2 guys that they initially sent. And sometimes these guys would be down on their luck. So, I'd buy them a champ burger from Checkers. I'd buy them a pack of cigarettes, give them some herb, whatever. I looked out for these guys. Well, when the bigger guys showed up, what caused them to come down with haste and decide that, they wanted to go do this thing away from Chicago, it turned out one of them was wanted for a carjacking charge in Chicago. So now, mind you,
so he was on the run.
So the 2 scouts that came down initially, they were there for about 12 to 18 months prior to these big dogs showing up. So I had earned a lot of respect with these other 2 because I was basically raised taking care of them. I was a middle class. Yeah. My parents did well. Anytime I had something to give, I'd help them. So when the main guy showed up, they kind of vouched for me. Now it's a 2-edged sword, because between the time they vouched for me and the time the feds came kicking doors in and things were dismantled, and I had a moment of clarity. I says, hold on a second. I says, I'm the only freaking white guy in this equation. The feds are here. People are getting snatched up and going to jail. They're going to think that, the white boy's saying something, which I didn't know jack. I didn't know nothing about what was going on in Chicago. And I barely knew anything about what was going on in Lee County there, But lo and behold, after that, it was probably not long after that night that I was in that Cadillac with that 44 Magnum in my lap that I decided I wanted out. So
yeah.
That became an issue, because here I am, 17 years old, in a gang that's basically a blood in, blood out, and I want out. Well, long story short, the 2 guys I took care of saved my life. I got blessed out. That's unheard of. I even went back.
Now, why don't you explain to people so they don't know what is blessed out?
Well, in my case, blessed out was pretty much what I was somewhat fortunate in spite of the circumstances. For lack of better words, they had bigger fish to fry than to worry about me. And, of course, I had to plead my case. I had to go before them guys and talk to them. You know, I was in a meeting with these guys, wanting out. The guy that got me in is right over my right shoulder. All right. I'm telling them I want out. He's trying to tell them to basically let him walk. He ain't a threat. He's just going to go about his business, you know, which I had full intentions to do just that. I heard him bantering in Spanish a little bit, and he was about to kill me right there. And the guy says he ain't dying here tonight. Long story short, we're having this interview. So ultimately they decided to let me walk away from the gang. And I'd always wondered. 25 years later, in fact, I reached out to that guy on Facebook Messenger, and I thanked him. You know, and I told him, I says, if it wasn't for you the night I wanted out, I was gonna get.
So now you leave the gang, you get blessed out, and it's basically the first day of the rest of your life, so to speak. Take us through the transition from the gang into the rest of your life.
But yeah, it's funny you put it that way, because when I was 18 is when I got out of the gang. It was time for a life change. So it was 90. There was a bad flood in New Orleans. I want to say around 96, 7. But I decided I was going to hitchhike to Louisiana and start my life over. So I ended up hitching a ride to Louisiana. And mind you, everywhere I go, I show up. So I'm thinking to myself, this is a fresh start. This is new. I'm going to go over there and do all this, that, and the third. Well, I got over there and just started doing the same stuff, man. I was a drug addict. I was heavily addicted. I was still battling the cocaine addiction. I was an alcoholic. I was problem drinking, blackout drinking. So just because I got out of the gang didn't mean the problems were over. However, the journey had began in a freer spirit, a free sense. I got a settlement when I turned 18 because I mentioned I got hit by that car. And it wasn't a pile of money, but I blew through it in a few months. It was party time. The party was at my place all the time. I bought a car. I bought jewelry, clothes, guns, drugs. Well, that got shut down. My addiction sent me into rehabs. Before I even left Florida, in fact, I had found myself in Teen Challenge. I don't know if you guys are familiar with a program called Teen Challenge. It's a faith-based program for homeless, addicted, what have you. So, yeah, I'm in Louisiana and I'm still living crazy. I still have addiction. I still have alcoholism. I'm functioning the best I can. I'm working minimum wage labor jobs. So now I still have Pennsylvania. So I'm coming back to Pennsylvania. I'm living in Pennsylvania for a while. Give me 10 years. I'm going back to Florida. And on my return trip to Florida, I'm checking in with the gang members. Everything was still okay, So I'd always traveled, you see, and I'd always had that wanderlust to, nothing was holding me back. So I'd hitchhike, I'd take a bus, I'd fly, and mind you, I still have all that stuff from the childhood trauma. I mean, again, the massive head injury at the age of 3. To be honest with you, it probably wasn't into my late 20s, early 30s before I finally, I'm one of them guys, I had to hit rock bottom, obviously.
Yeah.
It had ravaged me, destroyed my life, my addiction. Let's see, this is, going, there's a lot to tell. In my early 20s, when I was on one of my return trips to Florida, I sought to go to the military, active, the U.S. Navy. I failed my eye test. I was staying ready. My recruiter told me to stay ready, who'd get me a medical waiver. So I was out riding my bike one morning, I'd ride the bike 9 miles and I'd swim an hour and ride 9 miles home because my dad was Navy. My whole family was military. So I'm on my way home from my swim, and this was in Lee County, Florida, by the way.
Okay.
On my way home from my swim, I happened across a elderly lady in the neighborhood, and she commenced to tell me that the Pentagon had just been hit with an airplane.
Mm.
And then I found out about the trade center towers. So immediately I called my recruiter, and I thought for sure I was going to the Navy. I got a permanent disqualification for my eyesight. Remember the accident? The eye's all messed up. I got some temporary or some blindness in this eye. So at this point, and mind you, the person that failed me on my test was not, I can't say he wasn't an American because he certainly was, but he was an immigrant, and he was wearing an American uniform. So I carried, that because there was some of that guy, that old Kris. Well, who is he? He can serve my country, but I can't. So I had resentment.
Yeah.
I had resentment about that day, and then with the Twin Towers and me not being able to serve my country, which is something my family has done many, many generations. I was denied that at the, and like I said, I made it selfish. I took on against the man because I still had some of that old me in me. You know what I'm trying to say? 3 years after getting permanently disqualified, here I am going to work on Fort Polk, Louisiana as a civilian contractor for the Department of Defense. I went from not being able to serve my country to working with special force units, training, deploying units to go to war. So there was redemption there. That's the thing. My life has been full of redemption. And to get to that redemption, though, I had to hit that rock bottom. But
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and you said, the mindset you had with the guy that failed you was selfish. But Bobby and I were a little younger when 9/11 happened, but even it was going through everyone's head. Like, how many men were scared to death to get that phone call? How many men ran the other way? And here you are dying to go. You know what I mean? So I don't know if I would have used the word selfish now hearing the story in hindsight, but I understand, where your head was at that moment.
Yeah, I was immature about it, but the moral being, I had a resentment.
Yes.
And I can't explain. That resentment just sent me right back to drugs and alcohol because now I can't serve my country. And again, my whole family, my father was a sailor. My grandfather was a sailor. And these guys not only were sailors, they did multiple branches, Army. I had all kinds of servicemen in my family. And I can't, so that was another thing it kind of made me feel like an outcast, not good enough or whatever you will.
Right.
So I went down the rabbit holes for another decade, man, and addiction and, just living wild. And 2005 was when everything changed. I was in court. I got caught. I had a quarter ounce of cocaine in my pocket. Not proud of that. However, it's just part of the story. I'm standing in front of the judge. Man. I'd been waiting a while for my turn. There was numerous people ahead of me. And they heard my case. And the judge picked up his gavel. I pled guilty. I couldn't. What was I going to do? He's about to swing his gavel. And at this point, they had sentenced me to 3 years penitentiary, Department of Corrections. I was going to prison.
Wow.
Before he swung his gavel, Joe, I kid you not, I hollered out in the middle of the courtroom. I said, Your Honor, I'm a drug addict and I need help. I knew prison wasn't going to help me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah, to make him whine in the toilet. It's easier to get it inside than out sometimes. Yeah.
So, he stopped from swinging his gavel and he called my attorney up and they suspended the prison term and remanded me to state treatment. I had to go to a drug and alcohol treatment center, Southern Oaks Addiction Recovery down in Louisiana. So I complete the program. I go back to see the cocaine was in my job. My dealer worked with me. And I stayed strong for like 6 months, and then I started to slip. I had a couple relapses, but every time I'd relapse, because I knew if I didn't walk this line, I was going to prison for 3 years. No questions asked.
Yeah.
So every time I'd have a slip, I'd call my counselor or I'd report in person to my counselor at the Drug and Alcohol Treatment Center. And I wouldn't get violated or nothing, but they'd scorn me and tell me I needed to get it together. And what had ended up happening was my intensive counselor in that area, because mind you, the treatment facility I went to is 3 hours north in another city, Monroe, Louisiana, West Monroe, Monroe. So I'm at the addicted disorders clinic after one of my little relapses. She's looking for a halfway house for me to go to, mainly to get out of the area, to get away from people, places, and things that were holding me down on top of my attitude or whatever, my character defects. So I'm sitting in the waiting room of this clinic and I'm writing a poem and I called it Broken Wing. Okay. So as I'm writing this poem, Broken Wing, you know, talking about how the whole humdrum of addiction and how I got this broken wing, I can't fly, blah, 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 blah. My counselor pokes her head out the door, and I'm not even kidding. And she says, Kris, I found you a halfway house. It's called Sober Nest. Sober Nest.
Wow.
I'm sitting here writing a poem about an injured bird, and she's sending me to a nest, bro.
That's awesome.
So I go back to that town, or Monroe, West Monroe area in Louisiana, and it's the same area I went to the treatment center at, okay? So I go to the 3-quarter house, and by this time, every day I'm going to either intensive outpatient treatment, I'm going to AA, NA, and these are all requirements to be in the recovery home, okay? So within a year's time, some things had happened, and I mean, they welcomed me with empty pockets. Brought me in, let me get a job. By the time a year later, I had been working for Goodyear Gemini. I had gainful employment. I had attained my GED. I was getting ready to go to college. In fact, I got my GED certificate in the mail the week before I started college full time. Okay. Now I'm managing the halfway house because the gentleman who took me in when I had nothing and I was broke, busted, and disgusted, had relapsed and committed suicide. So suddenly I'm at the helm of the halfway house, and I thought it'd be a good idea to just focus on my recovery. And there was a lot going on. And by this time, again, I landed a job at the treatment center I graduated from. So I'm now a state employee, a full-time college student, a full-time employee. I had a bunch of stuff going on, you know, but I was staying sober and I was working on me and learning how to, you know, heal. I can't think of any better way to put it. I was injured. I was wounded from the past I lived, you know, and that's no one's fault but my own.
So far to this point in your life, I think it would be fair to say, you know, lived a full life, you know, at this point. You know, you've gone through, you know, being pretty much, you know, pretty traumatic childhood to a pretty traumatic adolescence, you know, traumatic teen years in the gang activities you were involved in, you know, and then you had this, you know, addiction issue that you had to overcome, right? So now, where does the acting bug come in? Where do you transition and decide, you know what, I'm gonna give this acting thing a try?
All right, Bob, it was 2019. I was on the internet and there was an ad for background actors for a filming in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. And, you know, by this time, I mean, I've never been, as I explained to you guys moving around, I've never been huge on material possession. It was something new. I'd never been in acting. I'd never been on a film, you know? So I said, what the hell? I'll throw my name in the hat. Well, lo and behold, they reach out to me. So I'm like, holy cow, this is cool. And it was Netflix. So, I mean, it wasn't like a small indie project. This was a big project.
Mm-hmm.
So I talked to my job. It was on a weekend they were filming. So I talked to the job, told them what I was about to go do, blah, blah, blah. Everybody's like, oh, that's really cool, this, that, and the third. And so I get an Airbnb in Pittsburgh. I go to Pittsburgh. I spend 28 hours and 2 days on a film set in negative, well, almost negative, but sub-zero temperatures almost. And I had the time of my life, man. The name of the film is Sweet Girl. If you've never seen it, please check it out. Sweet Girl on Netflix with Jason Momoa. If you watch it, I will, you probably won't see me. To this, I may have been cut. I don't even know. Because part of the film goes down at PNC Park and they're having a baseball game. Okay. So I was a baseball fan. And so was like 200 other people on set. So it's kind of hard to, oh, there I am. Blurry guy way behind the other guy, behind that other guy, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, we were in the stadium. We were in the upper deck when he runs in. I'm not going to spoil it. But anyway, there was a couple scenes. There was a scene on the bridge, the Clemente Bridge, and scenes in PNC Park. So if you see the movie, you'll understand the scenes. But it's a great film, great plot twist. I just wanted to plug Sweet Girl on Netflix real quick. Jason Momoa, So here I am. I had the time of my life. And I come back to my job. I'm an auto detailer by trade. It's something I love shiny stuff. So I don't find it so much of a laborious thing to make cars shine, if that makes sense.
Were you still in Louisiana when you found that opportunity in Pittsburgh?
Negative. I was back in Pennsylvania at that point.
Okay.
Back in Venango County, Franklin, over here in Northwest. So yeah, I go do that gig. I go back to my job up here in the Venango County, and it was 2019, right before COVID. And my mom and my stepdad were still in Florida. And basically, I took a layoff. Now, this would have been a year after I worked on Sweet Girl in Pittsburgh. I got laid off from my job. And again, I was obsessed with filming. I loved it. So a year later, when unbeknown to me at the time, I caught the bug, obviously. I would, a year later, decide to go to Southwest Florida, where I also grew up, and start pursuing film opportunities and see where it took me.
Okay.
So I was able to go down there. Obviously, I had a job in line, everything, all that set up. And I stayed with my parents and helped them with their bills, and worked my tail off and looking for film opportunities, networking with local groups, film groups on Facebook across Florida, just making connections, saying, oh, I was on a Netflix show. I'm here. I want to work with some people, blah, 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 getting connected that way.
Yeah.
One day a phone call came. Now, mind you, when I left Pennsylvania in 2020 to move to Florida, I had 1 film credit. Now I have 33. Okay. So in that 5-year span, that's basically 7 to 8 film projects a year, if that gives you an idea
annually
how busy I was
during the virus. That's amazing.
And a full-time job. And that was in Florida. So Florida was a lot more open than Pennsylvania as far as the virus is concerned.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I just wanted to bring you to give you an idea how much is going on in Florida inside of this 5 years that I'm there. Okay. So I'd gotten a few films under my belt, and one day my phone rings because, that's how we communicate. It's either phone, email, Facebook, whatever. Phone rings, I flip it open, and I start talking. The gentleman I'm talking to has got a British accent, and I'm like, this American film, British guy, it wasn't making sense in my head. But he's telling me about a film job in St. Augustine, and they gave me some lines to spit for him. I spit the lines. They liked what they seen. So I was on this project all of a sudden. Didn't know a whole lot about it, but I knew enough to know that, I had the part. So I leave Fort Myers, Florida, and drive to St. Augustine. I can't remember. I want to say it was like 5, 6, 7 hours. It was a jaunt,
Sure.
So I get to the film set. I knock on the door. I'd found out who it was by then, but I knock on the door swings open, and here stands an actor I had admired. Remember, I was in a Spanish gang, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, here's an actor I seen in an old Mexican gang movie, standing right in front of me.
Why do I feel like I know you're going to tell me who it is?
Go for it.
Edward James Olmos.
American Me is a great film. But no, try again. You're close. You're real warm. You're burning up in Vatos Locos Forever.
I don't know. It's not coming to me.
Blood in, blood out.
What's
So,
that guy's name? What's the
so
actor's
here
name?
stands Damien Chapa
That's it.
right in front of me. And I'm going in to have a fight scene with a Hollywood actor I admired when I was that little thug gangbanger. You know, here's that redemption thing again. You know, it's kind of like I got away from it, but at the same time, it was kind of reminding me that getting away from it was the right thing to do, because now I'm pursuing a new passion in life. And it was just a reminder. It was kind of like one of them little hints along the way that you're on the right path, you know?
Yeah. You had to go through that to appreciate this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. To that degree, right?
Yeah.
There's been a lot, but I mean, it's hard. It's been a lot of hard work. I stay active. I'm constantly trying to network with people, and I'm very unorthodox. You know, I'll send cold emails. I'll send emails to pretty major production companies, to directors. You know, I'll send emails. I'll send a little material, and you never know, man.
No, you never know.
Monday night, I went to a seminar in Clarion, Pennsylvania. You gentlemen familiar?
Yeah, absolutely.
Penn West Clarion was having an event where they had Sean Astin come and be a guest speaker.
I'm a huge Sean Astin fan. Rudy's my favorite movie of all time.
Yeah, Sean Astin is now the sitting president of SAG-AFTRA.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, we actually, a few episodes ago, we were lucky enough to have somebody on, Leah Savoli. She was on all 3 seasons of Deadwood. She actually, I think by season 3, she said, Matt, she finally got her SAG card. And she was telling us all about, he's probably going to be one of the best presidents they ever had.
Yeah, great guy.
That's fantastic.
Great guy. And you know, who better to meet in this industry?
Yeah.
I almost had the audience. I almost got him something for him, but not quite. I think we had more of a Lord of the Rings crowd.
Hey, listen, he's phenomenal in that too.
Excellent. Yeah. Yes, sir. It was a privilege. It was an honor. You know, it's like, these are things that don't happen every day. So here I am, coming from the pits of hell that I experienced. And you know what? My story is significant to me. Everybody's got a story, you know, and that's what really has me. I want to use my story with compassion and try to reach people that are in circumstances similar to what I was in, you know. And I guess that's just the way the cookie crumbles. You know, it always seems like once you go through a certain amount of hell, who better to reach back and pick up the ones that are still there?
Yeah.
It's something I've struggled with, because I too get a touch of imposter syndrome, or, you know, every once in a while thinking, oh, I'm not good enough. You know, I had a shitty day at work, man. Everything today was hitting me, bro. I was like, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't do the podcast tonight. This, that, and the third. But I was like, no, I'm going to push through, you know? And I use that same determination and tenacity in my pursuits for the film industry, you know, and I'm not naive. I'm 5 years into this thing. You know, some people it takes 10, 15, 20 years, and some people never make it. And, you know, there's that mentality, bro. It's like, but I'm very thankful for the anthology of wow moments I have up to this point, you know, so I'm extremely content. And again, I'm not naive enough to think that I'm just going to, after 5 years of mostly background work. Now, mind you, I've had a lead role or two. Yeah, I've had supporting roles. I've had dialogue. You know, I know how to get into character. I know how to act. You know, I'm still at that stage where you got to knock on the doors and you got to do the footwork. Not being naive to think that 5 years in the film industry is anything, because
you're entitled to something.
I
right?
am just now, matter of fact, my book's cracked over there, breaking into the acting world for dummies. They literally made a for dummies handbook. Knowledge is knowledge, baby. I'm going to learn everything I can. And I believe I'm at that stage where it's time to begin to learn more about the business side of the industry, you know, because see, I firmly believe in manifestation. You know, I'm not going to get I'm going to miss 100% of the shots I don't take.
Yeah.
There's a lot of times in this industry, I think all the time, everybody, every actor, every person that works crew, production, this industry is a crapshoot, man.
Yeah.
So, again, from the experiences I've had, Cobra Kai, being on film with actors I grew up admiring, with Damian Chapa, with William Zabka, with Ralph Macchio, all the names, Martin Cove, Thomas Ian Griffith. I can't make enough money or have enough things to replace how fulfilling those moments were.
Where you came from and your story up until this point, having these accomplishments and being in such a great place now. Yeah, I would imagine it's worth more than any amount of money for sure.
Now, how was it being on the set of Cobra Kai? I mean, that's the one thing I think Massey and I definitely wanted to hear about. I think Massey may even have a shirt on, if I could say it. So how was that? How was that experience? It was such a... I remember when it first came on, and I'm a big Karate Kid fan. I think all the films were done really well. And I remember when it first came on thinking, is this going to be really, really cheesy? Is it going to be ridiculous? And it was. But what's funny is that's what made it likable. That's what made it. So 20 minutes in, I was like, you know what? I didn't want this, but now I do. This is what I wanted. You know what I mean?
From the moment it was on YouTube Red, we were hooked, even before it made it to Netflix. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, that's the goal, is to grab the audience, However it happens, it's got to happen. But being on set of Cobra Kai was amazing. It's still amazing. It'll always be amazing,
Yeah.
I wasn't a diehard fan. And saying that to say I wasn't the guy that sat and watched every episode until I got cast. Bro, I was binging it. I like to think I'm kind of on the grandfathered in scale because, Karate Kid was everything.
Yeah.
So there was probably 300 of us on set that shared that same feeling, that grew up with this saga. And we're all here together. And you could just look at somebody in your age group and you knew they were feeling exactly what you were. It was an honor. It was amazing.
Were you guys actually in Barcelona for that?
I was not in Barcelona. I filmed for 5 weeks in Atlanta.
Okay. The Sakai Tai Kai, right? The final tournament, it takes place in Barcelona.
Right.
And I wasn't sure how much of those final couple episodes were actually filmed in Barcelona or someplace else.
No, I wasn't in Barcelona. I spent 5 weeks filming, and I was living in Gainesville, Florida at that time. I had just booked Cobra Kai. My friend, I want to give you a shout out, Sean Thompson. Sean Thompson got booked on Cobra Kai. He's a Florida film actor, producer, director, writer. Shout him out. But anyway, he got cast, and I was congratulating and celebrating and, sharing his stuff on social media. And he ended up sending me a link to apply to get cast. So I went ahead and shot the email in and spent the next 3 days pulling my hair out thinking, I'm going to make it. I'm not going to make it. I'm going to make it.
Yeah.
So I'm headed home from work, 5:30. The phone rings. It's Atlanta, Georgia. This was about 4 days after I submitted. And I'm on the phone with her, trying not to die in traffic, and she's like, I was like, is this Atlanta? Yes. She says, I said, is this about Cobra Kai? Oh, yeah. I was like, oh, I'm like, holy cow, I'm in heaven again.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I'm like, trying to drive and I'm excited. So all that happened. I booked. I went to my job. At this point, I'm a contract auto detailer. Okay. Basically, you're a subcontract. So that gave me the freedom to take time off. And I made all those arrangements, and all of a sudden my cell phone's going nuts. Right.
Yeah.
The towers wouldn't let me get incoming phone calls, but I could get text messages. Okay. So yeah, I just settled everything in for Atlanta the following week with my boss. They're going to be gracious. They even gave me $500 to take to go on the road with, gave me some spending money.
Nice.
Well,
that's great.
I look down at my phone. It's my agent in Miami asking me to get a hold of her. Now, mind you, I'm booked in Atlanta that way. Miami's that way. Okay. Keep that in mind.
Yeah.
I'm like dead center in Gainesville, 5 hours to Miami, 5 hours to Atlanta the other way. So my phone won't work, but I'm getting these text messages. All of a sudden I get a text message and says, I explained to them I'm having an issue with my phone. and I couldn't call, but I could message. I get a text message that says, Kris, this is the casting director for Bad Boys 4. Get a hold of me. So I look at that message.
I was reading this on your social media. I was hoping you would, get into this. Please continue.
So I'm frantic at this point. I'm shaking in my shoes, bro. At this point, I was already elated about Cobra Kai, obviously. So all of a sudden, I got to get to the bottom of this. I can't call with my phone. I can't message back. So I'm like, boss, let me borrow your phone. So I grab boss's phone. I dial this Hollywood casting director. And as soon as he answers the phone, bro, he's strictly business. He says, can you get to Miami today for a fitting to film tomorrow on Bad Boys 4? My heart hit the freaking floor, man, because I just booked Atlanta. These people have just been gracious to let me spend a week away. Yeah. Basically, I would have had to have quit my job to make it to Miami that day to get fitted. And I didn't even know it until my agent sent me a photo of the person they're looking for. They wanted a stand-in. Okay. And they had me eyed out for a stand-in. And they sent me this picture of this guy in this hideous Hawaiian shirt and khaki pants. It was plainly, they just stood there and took it with their phone. And below it were the measurements, what I had to have they already matched me to the guy. They seen me as a fit, but they just put the sizes down so I could cross-check my size. Well, it turns out a year later, however many months, almost a year later, the trailer for Bad Boys 4 drops. And I had to freeze frame it when I seen the captain's shirt. It was the exact shirt that my agent had sent me in my text message. So lo and behold, as joyous and happy as I was being cast on Cobra Kai, I had to tell Bad Boys 4 I could not make it.
You could not be a stand-in for Joe Pantoliano, the captain. I mean, you didn't know at the time, but you did the right thing. You stood by your company and you honored the original commitment that you already made. I mean, you had no other choice, right?
Yeah, I did the right thing. Yeah. But to this day, it just goes to show when it rains, it pours, and when the sun shines, make hay. Two major opportunities inside of the same week. It does a lot for the motivation. It does a lot. It just does a lot. It's hard to explain, And then, for instance, meeting Mr. Aston Monday. I talk to my guys at work about it. It's like, I'm like, picture a driver meeting Jimmy Hoffa. That's about what it was like. Yeah. You know what I'm trying to say? I mean,
yeah.
You got a Teamster driver meeting the president of the Teamsters Union. It's pretty much the same thing. Well, the only thing different, I'm not union, obviously. But to be able to make that connection, it gave me a kick in the ass, if that makes sense. It's like, whoa. It's like, whoa, because, and it's funny because they did photo ops. I did get pictures of Rudy, the cover of the film Rudy. And I also got a picture, an 8x10, that announced Sean's election to president of SAG-AFTRA. But they weren't doing signing. They were only doing photo ops. So when I walked up because see, at the end, he had like 3 sets. It was a long day for Sean, I was able to squeeze in a question because being an actor, I'm an hour away from Clarion. I didn't know if the place was going to be packed out, who was going to be there, what, this, that, or the third. I was fairly certain I'd be the only Cobra Kai actor there. So I felt like, I had a couple questions I'd like to ask. And so I get down there, I'm front and center. And they're doing a moderated discussion on stage. And, in that atmosphere, you can almost tell after an hour or so, you can tell they're coming to a close. And there was somewhat of a hint that they would want to hear somebody's question. And as soon as I seen that little inroad, I shot my hand up, and I don't think there was supposed to be any Q&A at this one. So when they kind of looked like kind of surprised that I was asking a question, but they took my question. And when Sean called on me because of that feeling of urgency, they're ready to wrap up. I said, it can wait. I said, I don't have to ask. And Sean was like, no, ask. So I began to ask him because leading up to that question that I asked, he had been discussing, of course, Sean was, he came up in the life of a celebrity kind of, his parents were very successful and very phenomenal actors,
Yeah.
Wow. Unspeakable. So anyway, for a guy that didn't have that, saying that I could understand a guy that came up in that having more of a shot, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking I have more of a shot because versus me, the guy over here, been in it 5 years, been busting hump, have accumulated some credits, some experiences, that the third, wondering to myself, probably weekly. It used to be daily. Am I doing the right thing? Should I continue pursuing? You know, am I delusional? So my question to him was dressed up in that kind of literature, in response to what he said. My question
Right.
came out. And he began to talk to me, and I was able to say that Cobra Kai was one of those credits. And he looked like he was kind of like he didn't expect somebody. And he began to talk to me and share with me. And it had an encouraging energy about it, like, yeah, keep it up, keep going kind of thing. And what he said next, I almost fainted. He looked over, and whether he meant it, whatever, he says, reach out to me. And I think that moment right there has changed my life. Because again, I sent an email, I sent a pleasantry message thanking him, this, that, and the third, and heard nothing back. Ain't expecting to hear anything back. But just to hear the president of something you're so passionate about say, reach out to me, that hit different.
I mean, he knew you're the only one that asked a question. He didn't have to say, reach out to me, right? You have to believe that it was a sincere statement. You know what I mean?
And
I think that's fantastic.
I had a friend sitting beside me from Franklin, Oil City area, again, Clarion's an hour or so away, but, she showed up and she's sitting right beside me. She heard it. Everybody heard it. I heard it. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I almost fell out, bro. I was like, did he just ask me to get a hold of him?
Yeah.
But,
That's
again, cool. I'm at that point now where obviously I need acting workshops. I need acting lessons, but I also need to learn more about the scruples of the business side of the industry and understand, as I said, again, not to be naive, 5-year novice, man, but I'm learning things every day. I'm reaching every day, but that passion, that drive, that hope that there's more, that it's worked so far, so I try to keep it alive as much as possible.
But like you were saying, with the redemption and the back and forth that you've had, you get scammed 6 months ago, and then Monday, Sean says, reach out. Like, it's constantly that ping pong, you know what I mean? And obviously none of the stuff you shared with us before 2019 is Googleable, as we were trying to prepare and do our research. One of the questions I had for you that I thought maybe Bobby and I would ask towards the end of the conversation is, if you had unlimited time, budget, freedom, resources, what kind of film would you want to create, and who would you want to collaborate on it with? But after hearing everything you've shared from 3 years old till now, I would have to imagine it's your life story, right? If you ever had the opportunity, right? I mean,
Joe, I keep hearing that.
From getting hit by the car till now, it's amazing. This has to be a film in and of itself.
I've been encouraged to write a book. There is also, and like I shared earlier, I feel like reaching back to those that are still struggling still. And I do, I'm active in recovery groups still, but I actually reached out to King Tone. I don't know if you guys are up on your Latin King history, but King Tone was the supreme Inca leader in New York of the Latin Kings and went to prison. And he got out of prison and he started this organization. I think it's called Growing Up, where he goes back into the ghetto and works with kids. He's got various outreaches. I've reached out to people like that. I'm reaching out to, high schools in my area, local juvenile detention facilities and such. So I'm trying to stay active, and trying to find my niche. I've been considering a podcast myself. Just don't know where to go with it. And then, I don't want to do anything that's based on opinion, but then I realize everything's based on opinion. So, that's
everything.
That's something about me. I'm a man of few opinions, and I find a lot of peace in that. So I have a hard time acclimating sometimes with what everybody else is all caught up about. I could give a shit less, you know.
Yeah.
I'm on my mission, and anything that's not
Yeah.
relevant to my mission, respectfully, ain't worth my time. You see,
Yeah.
but that's just me. I got my own issues. Obviously, I'm not perfect.
No, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great approach.
That's a great perspective.
The one final question I had, Bobby and I both have had issues with our brothers in the past as well. Mine is actually no longer with us, but to the extent that you feel comfortable sharing throughout this time, have you ever reconnected with your brother? What was that like, if you can?
Well, I mean, my brother went his own way back then. He went through his thing. He was a fighter. He was a scrapper. He got sent away, blah, blah, blah. Got a scholarship for wrestling, blah, blah, blah. Now he's a multimillionaire, blah, blah, blah. We just went on a kayak trip 2 weeks ago.
Fantastic. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I was wondering, that was in the back of our heads, like you separated at 8 and 12, right? And to be same thing. It's just like what we said about the redemption and that ping ponging, that those two opposite sides. That's fantastic. That's awesome.
Well, I appreciate you guys taking some time out of your evening to hear the story.
No, we had a great time. It was a fantastic conversation. Kris, we can't thank you enough. We appreciate you making some time for us.
I agree. It was fascinating. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day.
Yep.